Hello everyone. Day 2, you're all okay? Good stuff. You're all looking fresh-faced, so that's a good sign. I'm just going to say a few words before we kind of do what is our final keynote of Sound City 2014. Of course, the parties continue tonight on the streets and the football tomorrow and our big Saturday night finale. But this is our finale for the Sound City Conference 2014. The last time we had this man, who I'm a massive fan. It's well documented that for me, I thought the music of the man that we're about to bring on the stage is more important to me, certainly, and many, many other people, I'm sure, than the Beatles. It was the reason I got in a band in the first place. Many people say I shouldn't have bothered, but it was the reason I got in a band in the first place, was because of the music that this man and his friends made. I'm absolutely delighted. The last time we had him in Liverpool, I was working with Tony Wilson then, the late great Tony Wilson, on In the City, and we brought In the City to Liverpool at that time, of course, before we had great hotels, and we took him to the Crowne Plaza down the road. I was as excited then as I am now. Please, can we welcome onto the stage the magnificent John Cale and John Doran, who's going to do the interview.
Seymour. Hi. How are you?
How are you?
Good.
Hello. So I want to get straight into it, to be honest, but just in case there's somebody here who happens to have fallen out of the hotel window and ended up with amnesia. My guest today, born in 1942 in South Wales, was an integral part of the New York avant-garde scene of the mid-60s, founding member of the Velvet Underground. But something I wanted to talk to you about today was maybe something that gets not overlooked exactly, but not talked about as much, which is like John's fantastic career as a solo artist and a producer as well. So, but before that, I mean, like John's career as a solo artist goes on undimmed to this day. In fact, if people who've been keeping up will know that he's had several releases out recently on Double Six, an imprint of Domino. So I wanted to start there and say it's a couple of years since you had out Adventures in Nookie Wood, and I believe you're working on a record at the moment.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of... Hello? Yeah. I'm in the middle of doing radio mixes for a couple of tracks from it. And I think we'll be finished around July, so with any luck it'll be out September, and we'll be back to do some touring around then. So more than that I can't say. I haven't decided on what the title is going to be, so I better leave it there.
So Lawrence of Domino and Double Six has really good ears. I mean, people would arguably say he's kind of one of the most successful guys in indie, in the kind of old, like non-pejorative sense of the word indie, and like alternative music. He's been responsible for signing bands like Wild Beasts and Franz Ferdinand. And
You're talking about Lawrence?
Yeah.
Right.
And now you're a diamond in the already bejeweled crown of Domino. How do you... How is it for you to be working on like a hip indie? Because even though you've always done very kind of challenging music, you've kind of always been a major label guy, haven't you, in the past?
Well, yeah, I use that advisedly. I think major labels have put up with me. The indie sensibility goes a long way with me, and I appreciate what bands do, like what they're doing now in Brooklyn, and all the new ones that are coming out of Scandinavia. And it's what happens. The interesting thing about it is how you see young musicians when they're confronted with not having the huge touring machines that big bands do. They will sit at home and they'll have maybe a small keyboard, and they'll probably learn a little bit of Logic, a little bit of Pro Tools, and they'll sit there and they'll work on their computer. And really, what ends up on the stage is the result of the modesty of the production. And when you work under those sort of circumstances, you come up with different things than you would if you had a plush, if you're in Air Studios or whatever, and you had you know, a very heavyweight producer, and those things force you into making decisions that other people won't do, and it gives you, I think it gives you an edge, because you're at a point where you're uncomfortable probably because you can't do what you want to do, but then you have to put up with what you have and do what you can do. And that's where I think the indie scene is always going to be important. I mean, I think there's so much music out there, for one thing, that it's really difficult to get a grip on all of it that's going on. But it's a community that's united with the fight for, I guess, copyright. I mean, for want of a better word, how do you hang on to what you have and really get remunerated for it? And so, yeah, 66, I appreciate the company.
Talking about motivation, it might seem like a kind of a crass or a facile question, but I think it's a pertinent one anyway. I mean, what motivates you in 2014, and is it different to what motivated you when you were recording, say, Paris 1919?
Not really. I mean, I think anger is a very good point to start. And then if the anger runs out, the sarcasm will work. And then downright rudeness, and then straight on to brutality.
So we all know what nookie means. I guess that's one of those words.
I'm relieved.
Yeah. I guess that's one of those words that you probably had to explain more to American audiences.
You wouldn't believe it. Yeah, in America they wanted to know what nookie was. And Germany.
Oh. But the title isn't as straightforward, that, is it? I mean, it's got a slightly darker meaning to you, hasn't it?
Yeah, slightly dark. I mean, it's actually it all fell together in my head after I finished the song, and I realized that a song I'd been wanting to write years ago about a phenomenon in Japan suddenly came and made sense into this. I was thinking about all sorts of cheeky things and all of that, and how to give it an edge. But then I realized where it all came from. That I'd read this story in the Independent about Akihabara, I think it's called. It's the Sea of Trees. It's a wood in Japan where no light gets into it. And it's a holiday spot. It's a very seasonal and well-known place where kids go, where teenagers go, where people go. And there's one day of the year where they particularly go there and congregate. But the astonishing thing about this forest, for want of a better word, is that the first people on the scene the day after, it's like a bank holiday, and they all go there this weekend. The first people on the scene the day after will be the police and ambulance people, because for some reason, that weekend is when people go and commit suicide. And they were, and the story was really beautifully written about how the correspondent walked behind the police and the ambulance people, and somebody would stop him and say, "There's one over there," and then they'd walk a few yards, and there's another one over here, and they'd find people in harakiri mode. They'd find someone who'd shot themselves or hanging from a tree or whatever, and just this one weekend, and I think nothing. There was no foliage. There was no light got through the foliage, so there was no wildlife in the forest. And the interesting thing was the authorities were really wrong-footed by it, because they didn't know, because suicide means something very different in Japan than it does elsewhere. And I was trying to figure out how the authorities dealt with this, and then I saw a little thing on YouTube about it, where this guy would go in and show up at the parking lot first and look to see the date at which the the cars that were parked there was, if someone had parked a car there about 2 weeks before, then you knew that, you better go looking for something. And then they'd go in and he'd find people in tents, and they wouldn't come out of the tents, and he'd speak to them through the tents and try and stop this from happening. And he was a park ranger, but very kindly and very gently. So this whole vision of what happened in Akihabara sort of was something I thought, really, this is a really interesting way if you can capture what was done in an article, in a song. And so really, Nookie Wood came out of all of that background and the idea of sound design and some movies that have a lot of atmosphere about them. And really, that's how I've I've gravitated towards those songs that really start with atmospheres, and you set up a drone and you have an environment. You create an environment for this activity to happen in.
There's a track called Hemingway, which kind of really thrillingly, as the kind of title suggests, is kind of quite violent and visceral, and I believe it features you punching a piano.
Yeah.
Which, you're no stranger to kind of involving kind of violent acts in the creative process. I think that's fair enough to say, isn't it?
Yeah, okay.
What I was interested in is I like the continuity of this. I mean, isn't it true that when you first moved to America on your scholarship, could you tell me about the performance you gave that involved the axe?
But it was the last concert of the summer season, and all the people in composition in masterclass got represented on several evenings, and they refused to let me perform a piece. So I went to Aaron Copland and I said, it's great. I mean, Yanis Anakis was a teacher, and it was fascinating. I said, really? But they wouldn't let me perform this piece. I said, why not? He said, well, it involves destroying a table. He says, if you've got a table in the basement somewhere, I can do it. So he said, yeah, I'll go talk to them and explain to them it's not as bad as what it looks. But the thing is, the concert was for Mrs. Kusavitsky, who was sitting in the front row, and nobody knew about it. And we were playing outside the piano, and then I picked up this axe from behind the piano, and the axe came out, and you could hear the air disappear out of the room. And it was a stunt, basically. And Mrs. Kusavitsky left in tears, and then other people came up and said, that was so moving. And so,
What about the chicken?
Oh, that was really about the punk movement, about all the guys that were slam dancing and gobbing.
Could you maybe?
I thought, okay, you want. Tom Verlaine went to a marquee club, and he couldn't believe it. He came off stage, he was soaking with gob, people take a lot of speed, they drink a lot of beer, and then they want to show their adulation for the stage performance. And so I thought, yeah, well, if you're slam dancing and you're throwing yourselves around and you're gobbing and all that, well, how about this? Here comes a chicken, and the chicken was dead, and I just beheaded it. But there were people there with carrying pims. But the chicken's head landed somewhere in the middle of the room, and after as the people were leaving, they were all kicking the head like. It was good human interaction.
Talking about the scholarship, I wanted to know. I'm really interested in how much kind of culture shock you felt when you first moved to the States? Because obviously you moved to America, well before you were kind of involved in or a good few years before you were involved in the Velvet Underground. And you did a lot of really interesting stuff before that even happened. But coming from South Wales, I first went to New York in the early 90s, and it was insane then. I can't even imagine what it must have been like in the mid-60s. How much kind of culture shock did you feel as a Welshman, a young Welshman, and how you never seem to have become Americanified? How did you kind of maintain your own identity almost when you were out there?
I think you were talking about Tony Conrad before.
Yeah.
Tony explained to me after I'd worked for a year with Lamont and Tony and doing the avant-garde bit. And Tony explained to me that for the first 6 months of our work, that there was a lot of nodding and smiling going on because the Welsh accent was so strong. They really didn't understand a word of what I was saying. And I thought, oh dear. But it's the Welsh accent doesn't keep you back. I mean, it's a strangeness that you grow and love.
Well, talking of the accent, I mean, I was thinking about this when I was listening to White Light, White Heat, the album, as it were, recently. And even though I really like Sister Ray, probably my favourite bit on that album is The Gift. And I think there's the shorthand for Velvet Underground is that they're the quintessence of New York. But I mean, leaving aside Nico's obviously very European, but then for me, if it wasn't for stuff like The Gift, the VU wouldn't have been what they were. In the middle of all this feedback and chaos, you've got this kind of deadpan but still really lyrical Welsh accent, and it's beautiful, really. I was wondering, in what ways did your kind of either Welshness or Europeanness influence that group?
That's really hard for me to say. I mean, I know it was there, but I can't pinpoint it. I mean, there were ideas. That first album represented a year of work. I mean, we got together every weekend and practiced, and it's in the box set. You can hear the development of the songs. But getting the idea for doing The Gift and having stereo on one side, that was because Lou really wanted to be a novelist, and I thought, well, let's do this, right now. And it was more important to be different than to be good, really. And the whole idea was, I thought we could, because he had this facile ability to write songs about anything. I mean, he'd sit down, he'd start with a riff, and the song would be about what happened earlier that morning. And so I thought, well, we could really go out on stage and give Bob Dylan a run for his money here. I think we could, just do a different concert every night, never make records, and people would come to the concerts, and that's how we'd do it. It didn't work out that way, but I think, we made it difficult for ourselves to really get very far, and Andy showing up was just a gift of the gods. Then everything fell into place. Everybody understood, this is literature, this is art, this is poetry. And
I've often felt, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, that you've never, even at your kind of times when you're kind of rocking out and on your solo stuff where you're doing rock music, and even in the VU, you've never really been 100% a rock and roller. I was wondering if your classical training has always given you a slightly skewed or outsider perspective on rock and roll.
No doubt, yeah. I mean, but I think that it got preempted. I mean, the classical stuff got preempted. ELO, for instance, I always thought that they took the electric violin and everything else a step further. I thought it was very exciting what Jeff Lynne did. And if, my jealousy aside, I mean, if we'd worked harder at it, we could have gotten there. And so classical music got preempted. People started using it in songs, and stuff, little phrases from here and there. And then the gig was up. It's like, all right, back then to the rhythm. So we got hip hop, and I'm gravitating to that because there are some really interesting textures and everything. I mean, it's just that technology is fine, but you got to don't put aside the human element. That it's your reaction to what to the ideas that are in hip hop that are really valuable to you.
Do you still apply kind of, because I know you really like hip hop, do you still apply any of that methodology to what you do now?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I go to the MCC and I start there, and I put the swing in, and on Vampire Cafe, I mean, there are two contradictory swings going on, and it's a stumbling. It's the rhythm it stumbles against each other, and every time we tried to play it, I didn't have the right drummer because the one that I did kept trying to straighten the beat out. And I said, but it's collapsing. I said, just let it collapse. Don't. But so it's doing it live is. There are some people that can do it live. I mean, I've been working with the drummer from Atlanta who can just lean that backbeat back, and it's great and it's sexy, and so you don't need the machines necessarily to do that.
I mean, it's so easy to make music on the. I'm not necessarily saying good music, but it's so easy for people to make music on the fly these days. Do you use kind of like laptops and plugins and stuff like that to sequence stuff?
Well, we use SPD pads, and there's a lot of stuff in there, and layering it is a lot of stuff. Short of going on stage with a Pro Tools rig, you can do it with. And sometimes when you do it with no, what's happened is that a lot of the older songs sound even better with newer arrangements, where you don't have all the gear and everything else that you had in them. You just do it very simply and very sparsely.
Would you say it's fair enough, in general terms, that there seems to be, to me, a through line through your career of taking very bleak and disturbing concepts and ideas and investing them with a sense of beauty or dignity through the music?
Totally.
Could you tell me a bit about, I mean, one example that leaps out to me, out of many, is kind of Paris 1919. Can you tell me a bit about the genesis of that album and how?
Oh, it's easy. I was working at Warner Brothers, and I was sitting around, I was working on Modern Lovers, I think, and the Cold War was raging, and everybody was saying, what's going on there, and people were running away to Argentina to get away from the bomb, and I was writing all these songs, and I suddenly realized that all these songs were just nostalgic. They're nostalgic for the stuff that I miss in Europe. And the feelings that I get from cities in Europe, from places there. And then I looked at Europe and I thought, man, what a mess. I said, how do we end up here? I said, we ended up here because of what happened in Paris in 1919. Yeah, it was a stretch, but I mean, that was a good tab for the album at the time.
I've read it said that Paris 1919 was an album, as you've just said, was an album about America written in London, but
no, about London.
Sorry, an album about Europe written in America, but then Fear was the exact opposite. It was an album written in London about America. Did you feel kind of rootless or dislocated, despite being mainly based in America during the 70s and late 60s?
There's something to that. I mean, I know when I was at Warner Brothers, I used to hear stories about Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, and I loved the Beach Boys and everything. I had my ear to the ground all the time to hear stories about what was coming up from the Beach Boys. What was the next album? Was it going to be another Pet Sounds? Van Dyke Parks was down the hall. And I thought, but I never sat around and listened to it. And then I would listen to a lot of the stuff that came out of London at the time. And then I moved to London, and I had a basement apartment, and all I had on that turntable was just streams of Beach Boys. So it's like, where are you today?
What about, what about your, I mean, some of the best albums ever recorded, I would say, in any genre are the albums you did with Nico. How early on did you talk to her about doing albums with just the two of you? I mean,
I don't really think I did until Danny Fields got her a deal with Jack Holtzman. Danny knew Nico from the factory. He knew me from the factory, and he was working for Jack, and obviously thought that she suddenly stopped being a model. She didn't like that scene, and wanted to write songs and be poetic, and fell in love with Jim Morrison, who set her on course for being a poet, and she would sit down and write. And as a German writing in English, and sometimes in German, she would got the most impossible instrument in the world, a harmonium, and sat around and wrote all these songs. So Danny put that together with Jack and suggested that I produce it. So, you know, when we finished it, and the people at Elektra in LA were just gobsmacked. I mean, I had no idea this was going on down here. How long has this been going on? And so we mixed it and sent it to Jack, and Jack called me up on the phone. He said, "I really like this album." And if you imagine what year that was, you know, that album came out, and you have the head of a record company saying, "I really like this album." I mean, that's unbelievable. And I said, "Yeah, okay, well, but I want to produce." So he said, "Well, let's find the right vehicle."
They still sound very modern, those records, and they're still, if listened to in the wrong environment or headspace, very harrowing to listen to.
Yeah.
Were they kind of hard in any way to record? Were they hard in that kind of way to record?
Not for me. I mean, I by that time I understood Nico. You know, I knew the tantrums and the mood changes and everything else. And, you know, because I worked incrementally, I played all the instruments. She wasn't always aware of what I was trying to do and what I had planned for the, you know, I'd put a viola, I'd add a piano, but it didn't make any sense. But I knew I was going to add an organ in here, and she didn't. So when she didn't understand it, she sort of freaked, and would you know, march up and down the studio and call me names and all of that. But at the end, when all of it suddenly, you know, then came the tears, and you know, and you weren't sure, why are you crying? It is so beautiful. You know, so there was a cycle of events like that I knew when we went in every album that was what was going to happen.
Do you think the kind of the temperament and the lifestyle and the creativity and these kind of lasting monuments that come out of it, is it impossible to untangle them?
I'm sorry?
You know, I mean, like Nico was kind of troubled in some ways,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? She, you know, maybe wasn't that happy.
No.
Do you think that if she had have been in a better place herself, that these albums would have been impossible to record?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, similarly with Lou. I mean, Lou wanted to be a poet, and really what was important was to have all of it out there. And the work was more important than anything else. You know, like, you get down to the work. And whenever we had a job to do, like we had to write Drella, it was the work. So as soon as we get down to work, you got 3 weeks to do this, right? We got 3 weeks to do it, and we did it. And so even with Nico, she would come. The funny thing about all those albums, after about the third album, she'd show up with these songs that were the usual sort of abstract images or whatever. And then in the middle of it, there would be this really beautiful little melody in the song. Ari's song. And so it's, I don't know, I think if you show people back the beauty that's there, then it gives them something to sustain them to start doing more.
Have you heard the Throbbing Gristle album, the XTG cover? They covered the entire Desert Shore with people like Anthony Hegarty on vocals.
Really?
And yeah, it's an amazing record.
Really? I wish I had. Yeah, I'd like to hear.
Can you tell me a bit about the film The Inner Scar, I mean, that was the genesis of Desert Shore, wasn't it?
Yes, in a way. I think she wrote the songs for the film, I think. And Philippe, I don't remember Philippe was not around for the recordings. It was done. I mean, I think she was done with him as well. I mean, it's like, that worked for that film, okay. I mean, they were living in Paris in a broken down studio that had dead pigeons in it. And they were burning the furniture for heat in the winter. Yeah. So I didn't have very much involvement. I mean, I knew that she'd done it, and I didn't have the film to write to help with the songs. The songs are the songs anyway.
When you were working with Nico on these records, I mean, ostensibly, you listen to that and say what you've done with, say, for example, the Happy Mondays, and you'd think there really can't have been anything in common with the way that those two groups were recorded. But I mean, is that a mistake? Is there some sort of essential core process that remains the same, whatever you're producing?
There's a core process. You've got to have that.
Could you talk us through it?
Well, when we did Paddy, we spent a lot of time replacing the instruments for the band, which really didn't go down very well. Because there was a family very close, loved their instruments, and they'd worked for these instruments. And at the time they bought them, they were new, but now they're warped. And we were spending more time tuning than we were getting tracks. So I called up SIR and I brought in a ton of the instruments and said, "No, play these," and everything was in tune. But the band was upset. The band was, "I can't get a sound, like it's not understandable." And so with most bands, you work on getting your rhythm track and everything else as best you can. But with Happy Mondays, I mean, it was by the skin of your teeth. It was like, I'm going to press record, but will it actually happen? Yeah. And watching Bez play Tambourine was a good afternoon's entertainment.
Like master at work.
No, I saw them at the GQ Awards.
Yeah.
And, no, at the Q it wasn't. And they both showed up, and like clockwork, up until then, everything was running nicely, sprints, the presentations, and then Sean shows up with Bez, and the whole thing falls to pieces. I mean, there's no order to anything, and you're wondering, what happened here? And people wandering around the stage, talking to the audience. He said, "Hey," yeah, it was real.
He's running for Parliament at the moment.
Thank God. They need somebody sensible.
I think he's got a platform of DMT for OAPs and like compulsory LSD Sundays or something. I don't know what it is. But
wow, it's better than fox hunting.
Better than his tambourine playing as well, no doubt. Would you still take on a high-profile producing job like the Happy Mondays now?
The situation is that these opportunities pop up all the time. Yeah. And to me, it's like, it looks all the time as if it's 2 months out of the year. So then where do you put it? And really, it's not just 2 months, it's an involvement. And I'm sorry, I've got to say I'm selfish. I mean, I've got my little studio and I'm happy, and then I'm writing tons of stuff, and I look forward to releasing them. I love going with the band on the road, and there are a lot of people that I would love to contribute to.
Was that true about the Tangerines?
Yes. Yeah, I tell you, that's the one thing about that album that I remember, is that I just stopped doing everything chemically and bad to my body, and I was really on a health kick, and that upset the apple cart. I was.
But that's such a. I mean, like I'm not going to sit here and diss Manchester. I really love Manchester, and I love going there. But it's such a Mancunian attitude that, look at him, he's eating tangerines. Like, you know, like it's the worst thing the Happy Mondays could think of. Eating tangerines. It's not that bad. They're quite nice, aren't they, really? You know. I've read in some interviews where you've been kind of humorously, I guess, but still very disparaging about some of the albums you've made. You referred to Paris 1919 as being a Procol Harum album.
Oh, that was nasty. I mean, because Chris produced it. I mean, that's not fair.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of a mad thing to say. I mean, the way that it makes me feel is like, you know, the opening of Blue Velvet, the David Lynch film, where you've got that perfect garden and the white picket fence and the roses and the grass. But then the closer and closer you get to it, you realise that actually this garden is just seething with stuff just under the surface. Have you ever made a pretty record that is just pretty?
No. Right, let's go.
So you've worked, you were saying before with the Happy Mondays, you've worked with some world-class kind of hellraisers in your time. Who were worse, the Happy Mondays or the Stooges?
Neither of them were really out of control. I mean, they were all entertaining in their own ways. I mean, Iggy and the Stooges were very together. You know, we did the tracks, and we had I think we had 10 days to make the album. And we did the tracks, and then it came to doing the vocals, and when it came to doing the vocals, Iggy walked in and gave me a sheaf of papers like this. I said, "What's this?" He said, "They're the lyrics." And it's the last thing I'd expect from rock roll, but to have, you know, so you can follow the lyrics for it. But it was the spirit and the power that they could get out of the songs that really counted.
Do you still have much contact with him now?
No, I haven't seen him in a while. I saw him at the Elvis Centenary in Memphis, and yeah, I think he's still getting thinner, I think.
Yeah. He looks good, man, you know. Yeah. It was the 1980s last time I had a body as good as Iggy Pop's, and that's a damning thing to say.
Yeah, write that down.
Yeah. I read a quote by you recently, which I kind of liked, which is that you said that you didn't set out, you never kind of consciously set out to be a Renaissance man, but maybe it happened once or twice, just by sheer dint of you doing some stuff that you were competent or good at. Do you think, or are you even bothered that, you know, about the way you're viewed because of this fact that you've done lots of different stuff? There's a kind of a vague idea that, yo, John Cale, well, really, because he did a load of producing at that period, he didn't really do that much stuff. If you actually sit down and look at your discography, it's massive, you know what I mean? But there seems to be this perception of you being like a jack of all trades, but isn't it just the fact that you actually work very quickly?
That's part of it. I think one of the things in the back of my mind always was, as far as compositions and creating anything, was something that came from European music and how it was important. You know, the whole Stockhausen Webern idea was that you have the 12-tone scale. The 12-tone scale is like the dry gulch of modern music. It's like you can't play another note unless you've gone through all 12 of the scale. You can't play a new. And so I got it in my head it was important not to repeat yourself and never to do anything twice. And that's still important. Is that you never get. You know, I try not to listen to radio, and I go on the web to look for things, but I try not to listen to radio because I don't want to end up at some point having written a really good groove and gotten a good melody going, and somebody says, "Hey, you know what that is?" So it's a protective device, but I also get off by not knowing what the direction of this song is. I mean, I'll try putting this there and try putting that there, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So really, all of that variation comes from deliberate variation, deliberate writing with different ideas in mind.
Tell me a bit about Brian Eno. I've heard that. I mean, something that seems to sum up your collaboration with him when you were recording together on your album was, I heard he attacked you with a fork. Is that correct?
I can't remember that.
No. Or is that you can't remember because it didn't happen, or that's the kind of thing that Eno was doing all the time?
No, I wouldn't put that. I think he came out with a pencil once, maybe. And I don't know. I mean, it's just momentary.
Do you think you two were kind of quite similar in that? And if that's the case, did that lead to some tension between you?
In a lot of ways, yeah. But there's a certain openness that really works with collaboration, and if you don't have that openness, and I guess he was always great when you really didn't think about what you were doing. You know, he'd go and play with gear and just break the gear. You know, just trying to get the sound, and going through that process and to get the new sound over here was really fascinating and really important. And I think he's still doing it. Now he's doing it at a professional level as a producer. I mean, he's doing it all the time. And but when we did Wrong Way Up, I didn't want to. I didn't want to make another record that wouldn't get any performances behind it. So I said, look, let's do this as a piece, and think it through as maybe a performance piece on stage, and then I could take it to Harvey Lichtenstein at BAM, and we could do it as a piece there. And okay, we'll do that. So, but it never happened. I mean, in the end, he just changed his mind. And I think he changes his mind, I mean, with the projects that I was on at critical times. I mean, we filmed the whole expedition to Russia, and the day after we arrived there with all the camera crew and everything, he decided that he didn't want to be filmed. So you could film everything but him, and anytime you got close, you get a pencil like slung at the camera. Anyway, it's what was interesting about it was that Rob Nielsen, the director, or did Was for the Dying. He interviewed Brian afterwards, and because Brian had written him a really lengthy letter, disputing the whole concept of documentaries. I don't believe in documentaries. They don't represent what reality there is there, and it was like about 5-6 pages long. And I read Rob's reply, which was like a 10-page dissertation. I mean, you can't keep a Harvard man down. This guy just like went and did a Muhammad Ali on the whole argument of documentaries. So watching that, and then having Brian interviewed at the end of it, saying, Brian, do you think that this film could ever be interesting or to anybody? And he said, no, I don't. He said, but then, of course, I'm not a filmmaker. So it was, I mean, the fact that Brian stepped out and that Rob stepped out, that because when we did the film, I was trying to get everybody that was outside the film, in the film, and in the film, outside the film. So I said, Rob, if you're filming and you want to get involved in a scene or whatever, we'll talk. Let's do that. Let's not make this. And then he said a different kind of documentary. And, well, he was the right man for the job anyway. So.
When Eno says that he's not a musician, I'm always kind of at the back of my head, I'm always thinking, oh, she doth protest a little bit too much. Like, the second that everyone leaves, he just straps on a flying V and busts out a really complex solo or something. But, well, maybe not to that extent, but he gets around as a musician, doesn't he, really?
Yeah, he turns it into his own.
I guess I'm going to ask you a couple more questions before throwing it open to people who are here. Could you tell me a little bit? I'm really interested. Whenever I interview someone like Ermin Schmidt or Tony Conrad or whatever, I'm really, really interested to know about the kind of ideas, the crucible of ideas that was going on in New York. It still really fascinates me. It's just one time, if I had a time machine, it was one of the times that I'd probably go to first. How did you first? I mean, obviously, the given story about you is like you got a scholarship, you went to the States, you moved to New York, and suddenly you became part of this scene. How did you become part of this scene? How did you meet all these people like Tony?
Through Lamont and the avant-garde basically, and so there's Tony and Lamont and Marion, and we had this group, the Tortoise, and the people that came around were Billy Linick. Lamont knew a lot of the people, and at the time Jonas Mekas was starting the Cinematheque, and the Cinematheque was what galvanized the whole scene. Because all of a sudden, all over the Lower East Side, there were people like putting bed sheets up and projecting films, 8mm, 60mm films, and sitting in front of it and improvising music and dancing, you know, so that, you know, there's a rabid little revolution going on there. So that's where the VU sort of ran into Andy, was be a band play for in front of Eat and Kiss. And you just stand up on the stage in front of the film, they project the film on us, and we play, and that was it. And I think that came about because Lamont they'd asked Lamont to do the music for it, and Lamont said, yes, I'll play the music in the foyer, this drone that we had, a tape or whatever. And so everybody complained it was too loud, and Lamont said, well, that's it, you know, if you can't play that loud, it's no point. I don't want to have conversations going on. So he withdrew, and suddenly Andy and I guess he proposed us, and we got in there. But Jonas was the one who was running what was going on in the city, in the Cinematheque. And he was the Scarlet Pimpernel of that period, because a lot of people came out of that Cinematheque group. And you want to know how all those people worked. It was in poverty, basically. You know, people sleeping on floors. I mean, not so many drugs, but Jack Smith was influential on Tony, and Jack was beloved of all the Lower East Side people. And they were doing something. The art world was really trying to create something around the phenomenon of the Cinematheque, because Jack Smith's first film, Flaming Creatures, was banned because it had frontal nudity. And so what did they do? They had a screening of it in a loft in Soho, just a screening of it, and they called the police and told the police that they were screening. All the art gallery owners came down, and they were and so big fuss. Photographs of yellow buses showing up. They arrested the audience and the film. And suddenly they're talking in Albany about changing the pornography rules and all that, and they get it changed, and off we go. And that had implications at Cinecittà and, you know, all the other filmmaking entities elsewhere in the world. And, you know, then in the middle of that, there was Lenny Bruce going and doing his number, and the Supreme Court, and so that gives you some idea of the sort of tornado quality of what suddenly started happening in 63, 64.
And I believe when you were 17 and still living in Wales, you gave a performance which involved you screaming at a plant till it died. And I'm guessing that you must have felt more at home, given that, when you got to New York.
No, that was a piece I wrote for Robin Page. When I was at Goldsmiths, the warden really was the one who drove. I just got this amazing deal with the warden about studying. And I got composition lessons from Humphrey Searle, and viola lessons from Gwyn Edwards, and he said, look, I'll let you be, and I wanted to be a composer. I said, look, this is what I'd like to be. And Humphrey Searle lived in St. John's Wood, and all of a sudden I'm just fascinated by Humphrey Searle. I just want to talk to him about how did he ever become during the war to write the dossier on silent killing for MI6. You know, I just want to fire away questions. That he didn't want to talk about it, of course, but the fact that the warden of a college in South London gave me this opportunity to run around London, sort of annoying composer by saying, "Look at this is my piece," and let me put on the Festival of New Music. And the Festival of New Music did all the John Cage, Lamont Young, Earl Brown, George Maciunas, and that's where I met Cornelius Cardew, who was the guy in London at the time. So I think it all came down to Goldsmiths in the end, that they gave me this opportunity, and I thought it was just amazing.
We've only got 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So what I'm going to say in advance is, if you could try not to ask a question that I've already asked, and just be as succinct as you can when you're asking it. But if you want to stick your hands up, and we'll get through as many as possible. This gentleman.
I think the music on all of your albums is staggering. I think the music on all of your albums is staggering. I'm always amazed by the variety of it and the excellence of it. But equally, I think the words are also very important. I'm thinking of things like the atmospheres that are conjured up with things like Cordoba and lots and lots of songs, really. I'm curious sometimes to know which comes first, or is it a simultaneous outpouring? Do you deliberately set out to create what are really quite complex verbal structures to the degree that sometimes really the words don't fit the melodic line and so on?
Yeah, sometimes I think it's important that the words don't fit the rhythm of the melodic line. It keeps the action interesting, but how the words work. Sometimes they work, you just drop in your lap, and there they are. But if you work on the rhythm of the line, you just use onomatopoeia. And from onomatopoeia you get to words, and then from words you get to sentences and phrases or whatever. So that's generally how it's happened. I mean, it's
so the music does come first, really, then?
Not necessarily, no. Sometimes I can sit down at the piano and boom, there's the first phrase of a song.
Thank you.
Hi, John. I just wondered, you've lived through some of the most amazing times musically. I just wondered, when you look back on your life, which was your favourite musical decade, or, which one stands out, or what can you remember of them?
What can I remember of them? That's the most important question. Probably what happened in the 60s, about how you felt that it was the Three Musketeers element, all for one and one for all, and us against the world, and you can't get a job working unless you play at least 2 numbers in the top 10, and we couldn't be bothered to learn 2 numbers in the top 10, and so and how attentive we were to what Bob Dylan was doing, because we knew that was kind of the standard. And what was he doing next? And how, after Positively 4th Street, there's a story about Phil Oakes telling him, you better watch out, those lyrics. Your lyrics are getting inside people's heads, man. You better watch out. Somebody's going to take a shot at you. And Dylan threw him out of the car. But, we were watching what he was doing because we were that was the New York thing. And oddly enough, I realized years later that the competition between Al Grossman and Andy in New York was really sort of something insidious. When we had the Dom and we put up the Exploding Plastic Inevitable, and then we got the offer, let's go to the West Coast. We go to LA, San Francisco, San Diego, and so on. He said, fine. And I can't remember his name, Dave Rothschild, I think his name was. The guy who released the Dom to us we said, we're going away for 2 weeks and we'll be back and we'll continue with the shows. So we went to LA, we did all of that, and he came back and there was no Dom anymore. And Al Grossman had bought the Dom out from under us, and now called it the Balloon Farm. And it never occurred to me that anything more than that was there. But then there was a relationship with Edie, the relationship between Andy and Edie, and it all started sort of, it's inexplicable really that it could be plotted that way, but it seemed there was some kind of gripe going on there.
This gentleman in the front, please. Do you want to wait for the microphone? You'll be one with you in a second.
I can hear him.
Can you tell us about working with Nick Drake?
Working with Nick Drake I was called in to arrange. They had all the basic tracks done. Danny Thompson on bass. It was all set up, and I just overdubbed for the rest of the album, and really tried to take the songs elsewhere. So it was really after I'd done my work that I met Nick, and we hung around for a while. And he's a fragile guy, very sweet.
I'm just intrigued as to what you think about the state of the industry today. I was kind of wondering...
Where do you want to start?
Well, I'd like to know what you... whether you think that the Velvet Underground would have been signed in today's industry as opposed to how the industry was when you were signed.
Yeah, I'm sure. You know, there were structures in place in the 60s. The way you got, the way you got records played on the radio, and then shortly after in the 70s, you suddenly had FM radio that was huge, that made an Inagata Davida #1 song with an anchor. You know, it was. So the structures were changing. It was all based around radio and whatever. You know, it was really difficult to get songs to break out, and. If it hadn't been for Tom Wilson, excuse me, I don't think we'd have gotten so far so fast.
How do you think you would have fared in today's climate? How do you think you would have fared in today's climate?
I don't know. I mean, you know, when you're new and you're trying to break all the rules are different today. I mean, the rules that we were breaking, I mean, they don't exist anymore. They're just, you know, it's a little more Catholic tastes.
The gentleman who looks a bit like Eno, you're not carrying a fork or a pencil, are you, sir? Okay, this gentleman over there.
Somewhat mundane question, but I was just curious, what kind of musical practice regime do you actually have? Like, do you play the viola for an hour a day, the piano an hour a day?
No, I'm a morning person. I get up, I go to the studio at 10 or 11, and if I have a lot of work to do, I get out at 2 o'clock, I go to the gym, and I get back, and I work till about 6 or 7. But it's really in the studio. I just go in and I hunker down and get on with some writing. So I've really been writing every day. And when we did, it got to be really good when I got 3 ideas a day. And you know, once you've got it to a certain point that, okay, I know where that's going, and just leave it there for now. And if you can't finish something, you better walk away and start something else. So, 3 a day would be my challenge. I'd be very happy to get 3 a day.
Gentleman over there.
Hi, John.
Hey.
I saw you perform Nookie in the Coal Exchange in Cardiff a little while ago. Fantastic, great night, great band. I saw you twice in St David's Hall in the 90s. First time you did the Island Years, most of the songs were from Island Years. The second time, the report of the second gig in the South Wales Echo the next day, I was incensed. The guy must have been at a different gig that I was at. To what extent does that affect you, particularly in that case, coming back to Wales and playing, and someone writing a bad critic about you? Does it affect you, or does it affect what you do and the way you do it? You
can't expect to persuade everybody that what you're doing is brilliant. It's like you never know. And but in terms of going back to Wales, things have changed. I mean, slowly going back to Wales now was a lot different than going back to Wales 10 years ago.
We have gone slightly over our allotted time, and I believe that they're firing up Stargate at the rear of the room, and it's about to suck us through its terrible meniscus. And maybe if we've got time for one or two really short questions. That gentleman there.
Hi, I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, but where did you get the idea for putting viola on Venus in Furs?
Oh, it was the basis for a lot of stuff at the time, because it was when you put the drone behind anything, it gives you a tapestry, it gives you a backdrop that everything can work with. So
was it anything in the lyrics that
it was
inspired it?
No, it's part of this fantasy we had that we could do Phil Spector live, because you put the viola behind it, it gives you this huge, and the Phil Spector hits that we're having, he was mixing R&B with Wagnerian, strings, and it was gorgeous. And so we thought, well, I'm not going to do Wagnerian strings or anything, but like anything else that would work and fill up like the space. Yeah. So that was the idea.
This gentleman here.
Thanks. Do you have a favorite venue, and if so, why?
No, they're all great. I mean,
you've obviously not been to the Holodelphi.
You present your wares.
Right, one more. Come on, one more. Make it a world beater.
When you worked on Songs for Jella, what was it like working with Lou Reed after such a long time not working with Lou Reed?
Oh, writing the piece is what we did. We did well. I mean, when you have a job to do, you have 3 weeks to write this, and you get down and you do it. And that's, no problems there. It's really when the work is done and everything's signed up and sealed, and then all of a sudden, whoops, I don't like this, and maybe that. Second guessing was really corrosive, and so we had no problems getting down to work, none at all. It was the downtime that really brought us down. So thank you for coming. Have a good evening.